Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Colonna Burke. Here you'll find the best tips on how to stay safe online. In today's video, I want to talk to you about email security. And I'll go over some of the basics, so to speak, what you should pay attention to when it comes to email providers, email security, and especially what to watch out for with phishing emails in 2026. So I have Bruton Mail here now. I've already made a video about Bruton Pass. Bruton has this whole universe, all these tools that I mentioned briefly the other day, and now there's something new again. This is now an AI chat. More and more providers are relying on this AI chat, and well, it's not as interesting as Bruton Mail and Bruton Pass. This is actually quite important for your online security. Why? Because Bruton itself is based in Switzerland, and especially for European entrepreneurs, it's interesting for anyone who values data privacy. And for those who say, I want to know where my data is stored in the cloud, I want to send encrypted emails, I want to use a secure password manager, and VPN is also available. Yes, regarding Bruton Mail itself, I can only say that I have used it myself. It is a very good email provider, a very modern email provider. And as I said, it is definitely an alternative for anyone who wants to know that their data is securely hosted in Europe. Putin himself says that they are based in Switzerland, and that the data, according to strict Swiss law, does not end up in the USA. That brings us to the topic of Gmail. And I think that the majority of my target audience and also my readers use it, and I use it myself as well. Gmail is one of the best providers, one of the most modern providers. I don't know of any email inbox that is as clear and looks as modern as Gmail, and believe me, I have really tried a lot. Email providers, email services tested. Gmail advertises that it is now secure, that it is smart, and that it is easy to use. And of course, Gmail also promotes the fact that it is from Google and can be seamlessly integrated into the Chrome browser. But when it comes to security, I have to say that Gmail itself is a relatively secure provider. I think it's also relatively difficult to actually inject spam there or somehow execute malicious code. In principle, that's always possible, but in that respect, Gmail is already secure. However, the problem with Gmail is that the data, of course, ends up in the USA, that it's Google, that Google is behind it, and that it's not as compliant with data protection as, for example, Postio Mail. And yes, you always have to keep in mind that Google is now also relying on Gemini, that is on AI. Many see this as a disadvantage. I see it as an advantage if you can then have the email composed automatically, especially in everyday business, I would say. Now, with friends, I do this less often, but if, for example, you send an email to an electricity provider or, I don't know, to another authority, you can have this email written relatively quickly, and then it will be automatically composed with Gemini, provided you have at least the Pro account, as far as I know, so that Gemini can be seamlessly integrated into Gmail. Another point in favor of Gmail is, of course, its modern interface. The many features that are also available in the free plan, 15 gigabytes of free storage, that is in total with Google Drive. Then in this case, you can also easily share attachments with people who also have or can create a Gmail account. That's the advantage, that you can also easily collaborate on Google Docs together. Exactly. And apart from that, of course, Google does make sure that relatively little spam gets through. For a long time, I also used WebDE and GMX, which are the German providers, the German email providers. And to be honest, especially WebDE was pretty bad with spam emails in the early years. So there were always spam emails, and no matter what you did, you couldn't avoid them. There were always these advertising emails and these spam emails. And Gmail is really super clear, and it's also relatively easy to unsubscribe from things like newsletters. In general, Gmail has a very clear and organized interface. And then, of course, we also have Outlook. Outlook is also very widespread in business, in everyday work life. I would even go so far as to say it's more widespread than Google. Microsoft 365, and the products are, of course, obvious. That's the Office suite, OneNote, and all those tools that go with it. I have been paying Microsoft per user, precisely because of the Office suite. But then I decided on LibreOffice, and what's the other thing called now? Joplin. So only on the desktop and by myself, then I can basically decide on the computer where my data ends up. But not even because of that, rather. Yeah, it's just that I always find it inconvenient to go into the browser. If you don't have the Pro version, then having to open Word or PowerPoint every time was just too much hassle for me. And in the free version, Word and PowerPoint are, of course, also very limited. And of course, there are definitely better alternatives, including privacy-friendly alternatives to Microsoft 365 and especially Outlook. But what speaks in favor of Outlook, especially in everyday business use, is that it's a super modern email inbox. It integrates seamlessly into Windows and even has ransomware protection in combination with Windows Defender. This is no joke. It really works even for home users, for personal use. So basically for private users, it costs about $2 a month and provides an additional layer of protection with Windows Defender. Yes, for ransomware protection and for phishing emails, Microsoft does this with Windows Defender and Microsoft Edge. There's also an extra layer of protection added, so you can be even more secure here, according to Microsoft. So those were the 3 major email providers I wanted to introduce to you, with which you definitely can't go wrong. And by the way, you can use all 3 of them for free. Yes, that's exactly right. I have to think for a moment now. Of course, there are also personal and business plans. That's always the case. That's how it is with almost every tool, the personal plans and the business plans. And of course, also the free version. With Proton, the free version is very limited. With Gmail, it's very generous. And with Outlook, it's actually very generous as well. Although the storage space is smaller, you can use Outlook as a fully functional email inbox. Right, that's it for the emails themselves. And now let's talk about phishing in 2026. I'd like to discuss that a bit. So no email provider, not even any other email provider that I haven't mentioned here, like Yahoo or whatever else is out there on the market, AOL, if it even still exists, can protect you from a fake phishing email. Especially in companies, it often happens that employees are careless, or rather careless, I'd rather say careless, and click on and open every email attachment. 2 years ago, there was a case at a government agency at a city administration, here in Germany again, where an older woman opened an attachment thinking it was a job application, and she thought nothing bad would happen, so she opened the attachment, and in a matter of moments, ransomware was installed. Malicious software that completely paralyzed the city administration's entire IT system. Of course, they then had to do everything by hand, copy many things manually, which was also difficult because all the devices were infected, so they mostly had to work by hand, which was obviously very cumbersome and in a way set their work back to the Middle Ages, so to speak. Of course, it then took several days to repair the damage. However, they decided not to pay the ransom for the ransomware. More and more companies are choosing not to pay this ransom. And I think it's good that companies remain persistent or at least negotiate, because usually even if the ransom is paid, the extortionists still don't decrypt the data. And the very best thing, I've mentioned it in several videos already, is of course to have a backup. It always applies whether you're working from home, for private users or for companies. It's always good to have a backup. Always. I've already mentioned this in the short videos with my USB stick. My whole life was on it. That's no joke. Of course, I was devastated. Private emails, personal emails, valuable emails for me personally, but also business matters, work-related things. And they were all on a 60 gigabyte USB stick, and it burned out. And I didn't have a backup, and of course all the data was gone. And that's why it's always good to save things in multiple places, on hard drives, in the cloud, on USB sticks. And for a company, it's even more important to do this because this backup can be vital. And now, of course, there's another question. How can you even recognize and distinguish phishing emails? Aren't they getting better and better with AI-generated content? It's not just available to end users. So on the one hand, AI can, of course, have a lot of positive effects, as I just mentioned. You can have emails written for you, reply automatically or in an automated way, get tips, generate images, generate texts, and so on. But of course, attackers primarily use AI tools to program malware and then spread it intelligently. And phishing emails are still a popular target, I would say, and a popular method, still even a preferred method, in my opinion. So how does the whole thing work? How can you recognize these phishing emails? Here again, it's mainly private individuals who are affected, especially by clouds. So you receive a message just like I do. Your cloud storage is full. You need to contact us now, otherwise we will lock your cloud. And interestingly, it's always the Apple cloud that I'm supposedly using, and I've already received at least 20 emails like that. React immediately. Your cloud is full. We have to lock your cloud. We have to charge you such and such an amount in euros if you don't act right away. So pressure is being applied, fear is being created. They're trying to keep the victims on the hook, so to speak, by using fear, by using pressure, but also still, in part, it's important to note, in part, there are spelling mistakes. Or recently, I came across something again from Well, these so-called princes or these poor people, these are the usual things where someone contacts you saying they want to send you money, like if you've supposedly inherited a large fortune, or on the other hand, someone who is really begging for money, who needs support and explains why. I always find that particularly bad, but they're written so poorly. It's really very bad English and also very bad German. You would recognize them immediately. There are much better phishing emails in the private sector. As I said, of course, also from Paywall, from Sparkasse, especially here in Germany, but also generally worldwide from banks and from major providers like Paywall and Amazon. And I think there are always phishing emails from Netflix as well. And it's easy to fall for them if you have an account there. It's about updating your password. And then this password, yes. So you are then redirected to this phishing website, as the name suggests, where you enter your password. And what happens then? The data is sent to these cybercriminals who then capture the password. And yes, in a way, you've just handed over your data. That's basically phishing without you realizing that it was a fake website. And of course, this works in all areas, so to speak. With companies, of course, it's a bit more complex. Usually, phishing isn't used so directly in these cases, so to speak. Yes, here too, attempts are made to steal credit card data or to lure companies onto a fake website, so to speak. But basically, it's more the case that people really try to spread malware via email here. That's also interesting again. For my target group, it's actually mostly done through email attachments and not through email links. This is very important, and you have to make that distinction here as well. Of course, it can also work via links, no question about it, but most of the time it's attachments that are disguised as job applications or as tools that you can then test out. It could also be an invoice. Often, it's invoices for things that supposedly haven't been paid, and at first glance, they might even look real, especially if an employee who isn't aware of it opens the email and unsuspectingly opens the invoice. And then the malware gets installed. My general advice is not to open emails from senders you don't know, or rather from email addresses that are unfamiliar to you. You can open them, of course, and nothing will happen at first, but you should never click on a link, nor should you open any email attachments. Yes, I know, these are kind of the basics. It might sound strange, but most of the time, an attack is only successful if you actually perform some action. For a long time, I was also afraid because people kept talking about backdoors and backdoors. And I thought, yeah, someone could break into my computer and I wouldn't have to do anything at all. That's just complete nonsense. That usually doesn't work like that. It's not some magic trick where someone just ends up on your computer and says, okay, I'll just take over now. It always happens because of the person themselves and through an action that can occur in two ways. In two very well-known ways, which I've just mentioned. On the one hand, it's actually through emails and attachments or links that you open. And on the other hand, unfortunately, a very current topic again, through security vulnerabilities in the browser that are actively exploited. And these are, of course, meant to tempt you to click on something, install certain add-ons, perform a specific action, but also generally through security vulnerabilities in other programs, which then simply aren't patched. This can also be, for example, within Windows itself. And of course, there is always a certain potential for attack. But you can really protect yourself against phishing emails. You can train your employees, you can educate and further train yourself. And the most important rule, first and foremost, is to know who the email is from, whether you can really trust this sender, whether it's a trustworthy supplier, whether it's a trustworthy business partner, whether you regularly receive emails from this person. And you often see it in the sender's name as well, for example, with PayPal, where PayPal is spelled with two L's, or that the sender writes in a strange way. Let me give you an example. For instance, they address you by your first name, Marcus, even though no one else ever calls you Marcus. Or my absolute favorite, dear sir or madam. That might not be so conspicuous, but sometimes you can just tell from the text itself, you think, how are they talking to me? No other company talks to me like that. And I never get emails like that otherwise. And for that, you really need to develop a certain level of cybersecurity awareness, I would say. You and your employees can really specialize in recognizing this. It's not that easy, I have to say, because AI can create and generate these things better and better. What AI is especially good at, of course, is eliminating spelling mistakes. And what I also found shocking, that AI keeps getting better. I can't quite imagine it one-to-one, but apparently it's really the case that AI can imitate voices or even replicate emails so that it basically pretends to be someone else. So let's take the example again now. It pretends to be another employee, that it's simply faked, this deep fake, so to speak, and then you react to it and think, oh yes, that's really the employee. And as soon as you respond, the person on the other end immediately knows that this email account is active. These attackers are really very cunning and come up with all sorts of different methods. And I think that in 2026, it will become even more important to keep educating yourself, because the attackers are getting more and more sophisticated to spread malware and the like, to install it even through the back door, so to speak. So I've watched several documentaries on this topic, and it's truly astonishing how sophisticated hackers can be in integrating this malware directly into Windows itself. But to give a final conclusion for today's video, most of the time it happens through emails because, as they say, they have to get in somehow, they have to break in somehow, and the easiest way is through trust. So gaining the trust of a CEO, an employee, or a supplier, and through this trust, because a person interacts, which can also happen over the phone, but most often it's via email, they've already taken a big step forward. And unfortunately, it's often the case in the business sector, but also in the private sector, that the victims are very trusting. There was a documentary about Telegram again recently showing that victims, especially older people, of course, are very, very quick and willing to trust. And the people on Telegram, of course, will tell you all sorts of things. These people then sometimes give out private details like bank account numbers, PINs, passwords, and all those kinds of things. And here's a final tip from me. You shouldn't give out such information over the phone anyway, but also not by email. Under no circumstances should you enter passwords. Under no circumstances should you enter PIN numbers. Also, be careful with business data and business addresses. Be especially cautious about what you share on the internet. And I actually find it even worse or even more difficult when it comes to private identities. There have also been repeated incidents in the past here, cases where this data, these addresses, ended up on the dark web. Entire ID cards, passports, addresses of individuals, but also actual business data. And of course, that's not something you want. You don't know, it's usually very difficult to verify, but once they're on the dark web, the point is that this data is very valuable. That's not just the case on the dark web, that's generally the case. These data can, of course, be resold for a high price. And of course, to some extent, that's also an email-related loss. So it's really important to pay attention to what you do with your emails in order to stay safe and to use a very good, secure email provider. The email providers I've presented here are all secure in the sense that they really make sure there's relatively little spam, and of course that little ransomware gets through, or that you already have a certain level of protection there. But you still have to develop the awareness yourself, not to click on every link, not to open every email attachment, and also to be able to read from the text itself. Is it really possible that this is an employee? Is it really possible that this is paywall? Is it really possible that I have a cloud account with Apple, as I just mentioned earlier, and that my storage is full? Of course, we all use cloud providers, or at least most of us do. And of course, it can also happen that a cloud storage gets full. It can also happen that you need to update something on Netflix. But these major providers usually won't contact you by email. And if they do, then it's usually quite obvious that it's obvious. And more providers are relying on these closed areas where you have to log into a website, like here in this area itself, and then interact through this platform. The reason for this is that many emails are still not secure and not encrypted. A very important point, Outlook emails are not encrypted. And Gmail emails are also not encrypted. Only the emails from Broodmail are encrypted. Encrypted means, and this is also very important to know, that really only the end user receives this email address, and that you can be sure that this email will be delivered. And it's simply a secure email provider that encrypts emails. I think Putin is really one of the few who securely encrypt emails and who is also based in Europe, because most major email providers do not do this. And most major email providers are also based in the USA. Yes, that's it for today on the topic of email security. That was a bit of the basics, but they're very important. You should keep them in mind, and then you'll already be on the safe side.